I was taking down the old rabbit book when I noticed the lamp had been turned a little too far to the left. Not much. Just enough that the brass switch faced the chair instead of the room the way June used to leave it when she meant to come back in with tea. I stood there in the den with the book half out from the shelf and felt that small, cold drag inside my chest that comes when something in a quiet house has moved without asking you first. The lamp should have been straight. In my house on Sunday morning, certain things still were. The book came free in my hand, with the soft, papery sigh I knew as well as my own breathing. The spine had been mended twice with pale tape, once by June, and once by me after the tape she used had browned and lifted at the corners. The Velveteen Rabbit. The cover rabbit was mostly rubbed away now. One eye had vanished years ago. The cloth at the hinge had gone soft as old cuffs. I held it a moment longer than I needed to and looked again at the lamp, though I already knew I hadn't turned it that way. It was the sort of thing a sane man would blame on himself and move past. Age, distraction, poor memory, the little drifts and substitutions of a house one lives in alone. I had been alone in that house 3 years since June died, and 8 since our daughter went into the ground, and if there was one thing grief teaches a man past 65, it is how to stop making ceremonies out of every loose thread. Still, I set the book on the side table and turned the lamp back to center. The den was cool in the early light. The windows faced east, and the white shears June had hemmed herself took the sun and gentled it before it reached the bookshelves. Dust showed in the beams if you stood at the right angle. The old pine floor gave off that faint, dry smell of warmed wood and lemon polish. June had liked rooms that smelled honest. Honest soap, honest coffee, honest floorboards. She said people spent too much money trying to make houses smell like fruit and flowers when what a house ought to smell like was the life it had actually held. I could still hear her saying that if I stood still long enough. I had already made coffee. The mug sat cooling on the coaster. She used to scold me into using blue rings around the rim because I had poured too fast and slopped some over. From the kitchen came the soft motor hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tap from the ice maker settling itself. Upstairs, the air returned through the vent over the hall stairs with a low, throat-like rush. The house was not silent. Houses are almost never silent. But it had the settled, contained sound of a place that knew its habits. Sunday was the easiest day to keep contained. I always began in the den. I straightened the side table, turned on the lamp even if I did not need it yet, wiped the shelf edge with the dust cloth I kept folded in the bottom drawer, and took down the book. Not because I was sentimental, though I suppose I was, not because I was trying to keep something alive that had already ended, though perhaps I was doing that too. The truth was plainer. June had read from that book to our daughter Anna when she was small. And after Anna died, I had once found June in that chair with the book open in her lap and no light on in the room. She had been running one finger very carefully down the printed lines as though she were tracing a voice she could still hear somewhere just ahead of her. She looked up when she heard me and closed the book too fast. "I was just dusting," she said. It was one of the few times in our marriage that she lied badly enough for both of us to notice. I had said nothing. I had let her keep the lie because I loved her, and because men of my kind make cowards of themselves in domestic ways they like to call kindness. I walked out to the kitchen and rattled mugs and spoons so she could have time to compose her face before she joined me. The memory came back to me then in that same room with the book in my hand, and the lamp turned wrong, and it changed the shape of the morning at once. What had been habit became something closer to witness. June had not been dusting. She had been grieving in secret inside the house she kept so orderly for both of us, and I had loved her by pretending not to know. It seemed to me, standing there now, that this had been the method of our marriage at the end, each of us making quiet around things that should have been spoken aloud. I opened the book. June's handwriting was inside the front cover in blue ink gone faint at the tail ends of certain letters. For Anna. So she'll know that love is what makes a thing real. Love, Mama. Under that, in Anna's thick third-grade pencil, there was a crooked rabbit face with one ear longer than the other. I had seen those marks thousands of times. That morning they made my throat tighten in a fresh and unreasonable way. I told myself it was because I had slept poorly. I told myself the lamp being crooked had merely put me in a mood to notice ghosts that were not there. I told myself all the ordinary things older men tell themselves when feeling begins to move under the floorboards. I carried the book to the chair and sat. The leather had cracked in one arm where my watch used to catch when I rose too quickly. June had always tucked one foot under herself in the matching chair across from mine, though her side had been empty for 3 years and still looked waiting. I opened to the place where the ribbon lay. That made me pause. The ribbon was pale yellow satin, once dull now and thinned at the fold. It belonged to Anna. It had tied back her hair for school pictures in 2nd grade. June had put it in the book after Anna died because she said the loose things were hardest. The hair ties, the pencil stubs, the napkins with names written on them, all the small proofs that a child had once moved through a house without asking permission. I had not moved the ribbon in months. Yet it was tucked farther in than I remembered, resting between pages near the middle instead of close to the front where I usually kept it. I looked up at the lamp again. Then I laughed once under my breath, not because anything was funny, but because I was irritated with myself. Men begin to lose their footing in exactly that way. First a lamp, then a ribbon. Then they are standing in the grocery aisle, unable to remember whether they came for bread or batteries, and deciding the world has turned mysterious because they cannot manage their own minds. I was not interested in becoming that sort of old man before it was required of me. I read 2 pages anyway. I did not read aloud. I had not read aloud in years. But I could hear June's voice in the shape of the sentences without trying to. She lowered it on the sadder passages, almost playfully, as if she believed sorrow listened harder when it was invited softly. Anna used to laugh and say, "Rabbit voice, Mama," when June did that, and June would tap the page and say that rabbits knew things about being scared that people had forgotten. The line passed through me so quickly and cleanly that I shut the book. For a moment, my eyes stung. I set the book down on my knee and pressed thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose until the feeling eased. There were mornings when grief still had the indecency to arrive new. I stayed like that a minute, listening to the house. Then I rose, turned off the lamp, and carried the book to the side table. Church was at 10. I still went, though, not with the kind of conviction that makes a man talk about grace at length over casseroles. I went because June had gone. I went because the pew held me in place for an hour, and because people there had learned the useful art of speaking to widowers without trying to cure them. Afterward, I would walk the path around Mercer Park, then come home, reheat soup if I had any, or make eggs if I did not. Sunday was easiest when I let it happen in the right order. The kitchen was bright by then. The window above the sink faced the side yard, and the dogwood June had planted too close to the fence because she said blossoms ought to risk things. The tree was bare still, but the buds had begun to knot pink at the tips. I rinsed my mug, wiped the counter, folded the dish towel over the faucet bar so the stripes hung straight, and checked the back door lock without meaning to. Another widower's habit. Another way to touch the edges of a life and call it caution. The hallway mirror showed me a man I still recognized, if I did not stare too long. Gray hair, more white in the beard than before, shoulders a little narrower. Blue shirt tucked in as June would have wanted. My face had become my father's around the mouth. That had happened all at once after 60. My daughter used to tease me about it back when teasing still moved easily in the house. I took my jacket from the hall closet and headed out. Church passed the way it usually did, hymns I half sang, scripture I listened to, and then lost to hands shaken at the end by people who still called me Tom, with the softened expression reserved for men who have buried too much. Ruth Ann Kessler asked after my tomatoes, though it was March and there were no tomatoes to ask after. I said something polite about starting seedlings late this year. Daniel Mercer, June's younger brother, stood in the vestibule with his coat over one arm and touched my elbow as I passed. "You all right these days?" he asked. The question itself was ordinary enough. People asked it, but Daniel always asked it in a way that suggested there might be a correct answer if I were decent enough to give it. "I get through," I said. He nodded, looking at me with that careful concern of his, and said, "That's all any of us do." Daniel had one of those faces age improves. If you do not know the man too intimately, tidy gray hair, clean jawline, warm eyes that knew how to rest on you with patience. He was 61, 7 years younger than June had been, and had made a life out of being useful in places where usefulness earned trust. Church committees, meal trains, hospital rides, paperwork when old people got overwhelmed by forms. He had been useful after Anna died, more useful than I knew what to do with at the time. He handled calls, he sorted floral cards. He stayed late in the kitchen and put things away, while June cried quietly in the bedroom with the door mostly shut. Later, when June got sick, he was useful again. There are men whose danger lies in temper. Daniel's lay in never seeming to have any. I walked to the park because the day was mild, and because walking after church had become part of the architecture of Sunday. Mercer Park sat 3 blocks over from the church, then down past the old elementary school and the dentist office with the fake ivy trellis on the side fence. The duck pond was shallow and man-made, though children liked it just as well as if wildness had shaped it. A playground stood beyond it, red slide-chipped wood, mulch benches worn silver on the slats by weather and years of tired adults. By the time I got there, the place was busy enough to feel companionable without being crowded. A grandfather in a ball cap pushed a stroller with one wheel that squeaked. 2 little boys were throwing stale bread too hard and frightening the ducks more than feeding them. Somewhere behind the play structure, a toddler was crying in the determined, offended way of toddlers who have been denied something important to them for exactly 10 seconds. The air smelled of damp earth pond water and the sweet, dusty tang of old wood chips warming in sun. I took the path that curved nearest the water. I saw the little girl before I understood I was seeing anything at all. She stood near the bench at the bend, not close enough to the pond to worry anyone who was paying attention, her small shoes planted carefully on the cracked path edge. She wore a yellow raincoat too light for actual rain and held a picture book open upside down against her chest. Brown hair straight and fine clipped back on one side with a green plastic barrette. Something about the angle of her head caught me first. Not familiarity exactly. More the little jolt of recognition you get when a stranger performs somebody else's habit with their body. I would have walked past her. I think I would have. Then she turned, looked straight at me, and said, bright as if we had arranged it, "Grandpa." I stopped so hard my right knee barked. Children say the wrong things all the time. They assign family to whoever is nearest and safe-looking. I knew that even while the words seemed to strike somewhere under my ribs. She was 6, perhaps, not more. Her face was narrow, the cheeks still round with childhood but beginning to sharpen. Brown eyes, fine nose, the sort of face that would not mean anything in a crowd until it moved and then perhaps too much. I looked behind me, ridiculous though that was. The bench beside her was empty. A stroller stood 30 feet off near the sandbox with another woman entirely. No man was approaching from the other side with a wave and apology. The child waited, looking up at me as though she had asked something ordinary and was now curious why I seemed slow. "I'm sorry," I said. She blinked once. Then, in a smaller voice that had no fear in it yet, only confusion, she said, "You look sad." The picture book slipped against her coat. I could see then that it had a rabbit on the cover. Not that rabbit, not ours, but something in the same mild family of creatures meant to be kind to children. Before I could think of anything proper to say, she added, "Grandma." June said rabbit voices are softer when somebody's sad. The world did not go silent. That is not how such moments work. The ducks kept splashing. A stroller wheel squeaked behind me. Somebody laughed too loudly near the swings, but all of it moved away from me at once, as if the air had gone thin around my body, and sound now had farther to travel. Who I said and heard how rough my own voice sounded. "Grandma June," she said patiently, as though helping a forgetful grown-up. She said Lila. The woman came fast from the path behind the bench, not running, not enough to draw notice, but with the kind of speed adults use when they are frightened and trying to pass for annoyed. She was in her 30s, maybe wearing white sneakers and a tan jacket, a canvas tote over one shoulder. Her face was plain in the way plain faces often sharpen under strain. She smiled at me, but only with her mouth. "There you are," she said to the girl. "You can't wander off like that." The child. Lila looked from her to me. I was talking. "I know, sweetheart." The woman touched the girl's shoulder. "Time to go." She did not ask whether the girl had bothered me. She did not offer the usual park apology. Her hand on the child's shoulder tightened once, then loosened, and I knew at once that what had passed across her face was not embarrassment. It was fear. I said, "Excuse me." The woman's eyes came to mine. "That little girl just said something about my wife. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." The smile stayed where it was fixed and shallow. "Kids say all kinds of things. She used my wife's name. Common name." She bent slightly to the child. "Come on, Lila." June isn't a common. But she had already turned the girl. The child looked back over her shoulder. Not frightened, only puzzled that the adults had gone tight so quickly. Then they were moving toward the lot beyond the trees, the woman leaning down to say something low and urgent I could not hear. I stood there far longer than dignity required. A little boy barreled past me with one shoe untied, chasing a bubble. An older woman with a walker came slowly down the path and gave me the polite half-smile strangers exchange when neither wishes to be known. I stepped aside for her and nearly apologized, though I had not actually blocked anything. My hands had gone cold. The sensible explanation arrived first because sensible explanations always do. June had volunteered in church nursery once in a while. She had donated books to the library book drive. She had known people I did not know or had forgotten I knew. This child could have heard her name anywhere. The phrase about rabbit voices might have been coincidence or borrowed from another book, or pieced together by the child's own fancy. Memory makes thieves of old men. It is always stealing pattern from accident and handing it back, dressed as meaning. I began walking toward the lot. Halfway there, I slowed. The path curved behind a low hedge of bare winter shrubs near the side gate. Voices carried strangely there. One could hear people before seeing them depending on where the wind pushed. I heard the woman first sharp and low, one step above, whispering. No, he recognized the book phrase. I stopped without meaning to. My body did it before my mind. A pause. Then tighter. "I told you this could happen." Her voice was close, just beyond the hedge. I could hear the faint rustle of her jacket, the child's shoe scuffing mulch, the little electronic chirp of a car unlocking somewhere farther off. I could not hear the person on the other end of the call. I did not need to. The woman said, "I know what you said. I'm telling you what happened." I moved then, not toward her exactly, but enough that the branches shifted and she saw me through them. Her face changed all at once. She dropped the phone from her ear. For one suspended second, neither of us spoke. Then she said too brightly, "Sorry." "Work." I looked at her, at the child beside her, at the phone still in her hand. She opened the rear car door, buckled the child in with fast practiced motions, and closed it before I had decided whether to say anything. Then she came around the front of the vehicle and got in without looking back again. The car started. Gravel snapped under the tires. I stood there until the blue sedan turned out of the lot and was gone. It is possible even then that I might have talked myself down if not for the exact words. He recognized the book phrase. Not the name, not June, not some church connection. The book phrase. By the time I got home, the light had shifted toward afternoon. The house should have steadied me. Instead, it seemed to wait. I let myself in through the back, set my keys in the dish by the door, and stood with my hand still on the knob while the familiar kitchen came into focus around me. White cabinets June had repainted twice because the first white was too blue and the second too cream. The butcher block island with the nick on the corner from when Anna had dropped a mixing bowl in high school and laughed before I could get angry. The clock above the pantry, the striped dish towel now dry where I had folded it. Nothing wrong. Nothing moved. I took off my jacket, hung it on the chair back, and went straight to the den. The lamp was still where I had corrected it. I switched it on, though I did not need to. The yellow light made the room feel smaller and more enclosed, which was what I wanted. The book lay on the side table where I had left it. I picked it up. The cover felt the same. The tape along the spine lifted in the same place. June's inscription was the same faded blue. Yet now, there was a different quality to the object altogether, as if it had entered relation with something beyond itself and brought that foreignness home. My eye went at once to the ribbon. I opened to the middle where I remembered seeing it earlier. The ribbon lay between the pages at the passage where the skin horse explains to the rabbit how becoming real takes a long time and usually happens by being loved until you are worn. I knew the line by heart. So had June. So once had Anna. But that was not what caught me. Half-moon smudges marked the lower corner of the right-hand page. Not ink, not age. Something faintly darker than the paper, oily the way a child's fingertips can be after crackers or apple slices or simply being alive without much regard for cleanliness. I ran my thumb over the marks and felt a chill walk all the way down my back. They were recent. I cannot tell you how I knew. Paper ages in a certain way. Dust settles in a certain way. The den had stayed shut more often than not after June died. I dusted, yes, but gently, and not like a man conducting forensic work. Old handling disappears into the life of an object. This did not. This sat on the page like a touch still deciding whether to fade. My own hands were clean. I wash them too often these days, one of those small aging compulsions no one discusses. The mark was not mine. I turned more pages. Near the back, barely visible unless the light hit at an angle, was a shallow crease that had not been there before. The page had been bent down and then smoothed flat again by someone smaller and less patient than an adult who cared for books. There is a violence children do to cherish things without malice, and the page held the memory of that small violence. I stood in the middle of the den with the book open and felt something begin to give way inside my understanding of the house. Not because a child had touched a book. That taken alone was nothing. But because I knew with the unreasonable certainty grief sometimes lends to ordinary facts that no child had touched that book in my den, unless someone had brought that child into this room or carried the book out to her, and then back in again. And no one had done that. Unless they had. I shut the book too hard. The sound cracked through the room. Then I did the first foolish thing fear makes a man do when it cannot yet find a shape for itself. I started checking places. The front hall closet first for no reason except it was nearest. Then the living room cabinet where June used to keep board games for nieces and nephews at Christmas. Then the dining room sideboard where we stored napkins and serving platters and the family albums. Everything there looked as it should. Napkins ironed into thirds, platters stacked, Monopoly box under the bridge tally game. In the sideboard mirror, I saw my own face growing sharper and less steady by the minute. At last I went upstairs. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet, warmed by the afternoon sun. On the landing hung the framed school portrait of Anna, 10 front teeth too large for her smile, yellow ribbon in her hair. I had passed that picture every day for years. That afternoon I stopped. The ribbon in the photo was the same shade as the one in the book. I stared at it a long time, long enough to become angry with myself for the staring. Then I turned and opened the linen closet. The first shelf held guest towels folded in thirds, the top pair white with pale blue edging. June's work. She liked linen closets to look as if a sensible woman lives here, which always so. Whether she knew any other kind. Beneath the towels were extra pillowcases, travel-size soaps from some hotel in Louisville we'd visited 12 years ago, a packet of batteries and the old heating pad. Nothing wrong. Then I bent and looked at the lower shelf. At first I saw only washcloths. Then I saw that not all of them matched. 4 were stacked separately at the far right, smaller and softer, printed with little gray animals that had gone nearly colorless with laundering. A rabbit, a duck, a bear. I picked one up. The cotton was thin with age and washed in a detergent June had stopped buying before she got sick because the scent made her nauseated. Behind the stack, half hidden by rolled beach towels, sat a nightlight shaped like a rabbit. White plastic body, pink ears worn at the edges, plug folded inward. It fit in the palm of my hand. I looked at it so long, my vision blurred slightly around the edges. We had never owned such a thing when Anna was small. June disliked nursery decor that looked like it had been designed by committee. A child is not a cartoon, she used to say. A child can sleep in an ordinary room. If there had been a rabbit nightlight in my house at any time in the last 30 years, I would have remembered it. I reached farther in and my fingers brushed the wall of the closet door frame. There, at knee height, faint beneath a little careless overpaint, was a pencil mark. Then another above it. Height lines. Child's height lines. Not many. 2, perhaps 3 lightly sanded, then painted over badly enough that the lead still ghosted through if you knew where to look. My hand dropped to my side. June and I had marked Anna's height on the mudroom door when she was little until we repainted, and she cried at the loss of it, so June copied the marks onto a strip of craft paper and tucked it in a cookbook. That was the sort of thing she did. She hated losing evidence that life had happened in a room. I backed out of the closet. The hallway seemed longer than before. I went down to the kitchen because that was where one goes when the house begins to feel wrong. A kitchen gives a man tasks even when his mind has stopped functioning properly. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, though I did not especially want tea. I stood with both hands on the counter while the burner clicked blue under the metal. The window over the sink showed the side yard paling toward evening. A crow landed in the dogwood and made the thin branches bounce. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a mower coughed to life and then died again. The ordinariness of these sounds felt obscene. I thought of June at this same counter pencil tucked behind one ear, making lists on the backs of church bulletins. I thought of Anna at 17 leaning against the refrigerator in socks, eating cereal out of the box, while promising me she would absolutely not be late for school again. I thought of the girl in the yellow raincoat saying Grandma June with that calm certainty children have when they know the name of something real. Then another memory came uninvited and sharp enough to make me grip the counter harder. The last Thanksgiving before Anna vanished properly from our lives had been quieter than most. She came late. Her hair smelled faintly medicinal, as if from dry shampoo and some clinic cleanser I could not name. She was thinner than she should have been, face delicate, in a way fathers are not supposed to notice without panic. June had hugged her too carefully, as if afraid too much mothering might send her back out the door. Daniel had been there carving turkey with his shirt sleeves rolled. He had taken over practical things in those years, the way ivy takes over a fence, incremental enough to seem useful. At one point, Anna stood at this very counter, one hand flat against the wood, and said, "I need to tell you all something, but I need you not to." Then June dropped a serving spoon. Daniel laughed and bent to get it before Anna could continue. I remember that much because the interruption irritated me. Later, Anna hardly ate. She asked for ginger ale instead of wine, which I took then as a sign of fragile good sense, and now suddenly felt opening in my mind like a crack. I had forgotten that, or not forgotten. Filed it under harmlessness, because harmlessness was easier to live with. The kettle whistled softly before full boil, a thin rising note. I turned off the burner. Did not make tea. Instead, I crossed to the recipe shelf. June kept the binders by season, as if weather itself deserved administrative respect. Winter soups, summer suppers, baking, holiday. She slid grocery lists into them when she was in a hurry, and after she died, I had found church donation envelopes, a dry cleaner receipt from 2011, and once a note that simply read, "Ask Anna about her cough," in the margin of a lemon bar recipe. I do not know what made me reach for the baking binder first, except that it was nearest. The plastic cover rasped under my hand. I set it on the table and opened it. June's indexing tabs, handwritten in blue marker, leaned slightly right because she wrote fast when it was for herself. Pound cakes, cookies, church desserts. sweetbreads. Between sugar cookies and banana bread, I found only what belonged there: stained recipe cards, clipped magazine pages. June's brisk little notes about oven temperatures other women had gotten wrong in print. I turned more slowly. Halfway through the binder, tucked loose between a coffee cake card and an old church potluck list, lay an index card I had never seen before. It was yellowed only at the edges, meaning it had not lived there all that long. On the lined side in June's hand was not a recipe. It was a shopping list. Bananas, graham crackers, whole milk yogurt, applesauce. Then on the line beneath, written smaller, as if added later, formula. I sat down without feeling the chair take me. For a while I only looked. June's handwriting was unmistakable. She crossed her sevens. She made her lowercase y's with a sharp, almost angry little tail. In the top right corner was a date. May 14th, 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I had believed there was nothing left to hope for where Anna was concerned, except that she might remain alive somewhere long enough to choose help again. June had said almost exactly that to me one night in bed, facing the dark, after we had gone 3 months without hearing from her. I remembered the date only because it was 2 days after our anniversary, and I had felt ashamed to notice that silence could make a marriage easier to manage. Yet here in June's hand on a card, slid into a baking binder, was a list for child food and infant formula, dated in the middle of that same lost year. I reached out and touched the word with one finger, as though it might blur and reveal itself as something else. It did not. The kitchen light had shifted. Evening had come down enough that the window above the sink reflected part of the room back at me, table binder the shape of my own bent head. On the counter, the kettle sat cooling, a thin thread of steam still lifting from the spout and vanishing before it reached the cabinet underside. I thought of the rabbit nightlight in the closet, the washcloths, the book, the phrase at the park, the woman behind the hedge saying he recognized the book phrase. Then I looked again at June's list and understood with a steadiness more frightening than panic that my wife had once intended to buy formula for a child during the years I had been told there was no child to know. And whatever else had happened in this house, whatever had been softened, delayed, or hidden in the name of peace, June had known enough to write it down. I sat at the kitchen table until the steam quit the kettle and the room cooled around me. The card stayed where it was between my hands, yellowed edges. June's blue ink, the word formula written smaller than the rest, as if she had added it after thinking better of it and then decided not to think better after all. Bananas, graham crackers, whole milk yogurt, applesauce, formula. I read the date 3 times because I had stopped trusting first readings. May 14th, 6 years ago. There are discoveries that arrive like broken glass, all immediate shock and blood. This was worse. This had the slow, intimate cruelty of recognition. It slid under things I had already arranged inside myself and began shifting them one at a time. June had not been a careless woman. She did not write lists for ideas. She wrote lists because she meant to buy what was on them. If she had written formula, she expected a child who needed formula or knew somebody close enough to one that she meant to carry the burden home herself. I looked at the shelves, the sink the dogwood beyond the window, and for the first time in years the kitchen did not feel like the safest room in the house. It felt like a place where decisions had once been made without me. I picked up the binder again and checked every page as carefully as a man checks a wound he suspects is deeper than it looks. More recipes, more clipped magazine pages, a church bake sale flyer, June's note on a pound cake card, too much nutmeg, never again. Nothing else as strange as the list. Still, once you know a room has lied by omission, every ordinary thing in it takes on a strained expression. The card had not been slipped in any random place. It sat between coffee cake and banana bread, which meant nothing on its face except that June usually tucked grocery lists wherever her hand happened to be when the phone rang or the oven timer went off. Yet even that unsettled me now. It meant she had not hidden it well. Maybe she had meant to come back for it. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe she had wanted it close and then lost her nerve. I thought of her at this table with a pencil behind one ear, the blue china mug leaving a damp ring on the placemat, her mouth tightening slightly whenever she wrote something she did not want to admit she knew. How many times had I walked past her in these last years of Anna's trouble and accepted the shape of her worry without asking what had sharpened it? How many times had she looked up from a list and decided I should not know yet? The room stayed very still. At length, I took the card from the binder and carried it into the den. The lamp still burned on the side table, lighting the old rabbit book where I had left it. I set the card beside the book and stood back. That was the first time the two things sat together in my line of sight, June's inscription in the book, June's shopping list on the card, both carrying traces of a child I had been taught not to imagine. The effect of it was ugly and private. It felt like walking in on part of my marriage after both people in it had already left the room. I did not sleep much that night. I turned out lights in their usual order, checked the locks twice, went upstairs, lay down, got up again, and came back to the den in my socks at 1 a.m. because the house seemed to have changed pitch after dark. The den lamp threw a yellow pool over the side table. Outside the front window, the street was black except for one porch light across from mine. I sat in my chair and opened the book again. The ribbon lay where I had left it. Near the center pages where the child's smudges had shown under the lamp, I found something else I had missed before a faint waxy drag near the margin paled and colorless until I angled the page. Crayon. Not much. One quick line as if a child had held a crayon in the wrong hand while listening and let it graze the paper. I fetched my reading glasses from the drawer and looked again. It was real. I closed the book and rested it on my knee. June used to say that children never touched objects halfway. They either ignored them or entered them completely. You could tell if a child had really known a room by which things bore the careless marks of love. Once, when Anna was 7, June found a thumbprint in flour on the dining room wall and refused to let me wash it off for a week because, as she put it, she was here enough to leave herself on the house. I had laughed at that. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over my shoulder while June pointed to the white smudge on the wallpaper as if it were a fresco. Now that memory changed shape under me. The child mark in the book did not feel affectionate. It felt like testimony. By morning, my thoughts had arranged themselves into something I could carry through the day without appearing mad to the outside world. The card did not prove a granddaughter. The child at the park did not prove anything at all yet, except that she knew a private phrase. The nightlight and washcloths might still be explained by church donations, nursery overflow favors done for other people. It is extraordinary how long the mind can go on defending what it already hates. What I did know was narrower and harder. Daniel Mercer had responded too smoothly. The woman at the park had been afraid. June had a child-related shopping list dated inside a year when I had believed our daughter too far gone, too absent, too unreachable for even small hope. Those things deserved an answer. And there was one person close enough to ask without making myself ridiculous before I had more in hand. Daniel. I waited until late afternoon, not wanting to seem as though I had spent the entire night feeding on shadows, though in truth I had. I called him at home. He answered on the third ring. Tom. Daniel. You busy? No. Just going over some church budget notes. You all right? Again that question. Not how are you? Not what's going on. Are you all right? As if my condition were the subject more than the reason for the call. I was hoping I could stop by for a minute. A pause too small to blame. Then, of course. Daniel lived 15 minutes away in a brick ranch with neat shrubs, a flagstone path, and the sort of disciplined mulch beds men acquire when they have made peace with retirement by turning their edges precise. He had been alone since his divorce, 12 years back, though alone in Daniel's life seemed less like sorrow than scheduling. Everything in his house arrived arranged. He opened the door before I knocked twice. "Come in," he said. "I've got coffee on if you want some." I said I didn't. He led me into the front sitting room instead of the kitchen, which itself meant something if one had known him and June long enough. The sitting room was for controlled conversations. 2 blue chairs, 1 brown sofa, framed prints no one loved, but no one objected to, and not a single surface left to accidental clutter. I stayed standing a moment before sitting. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I took the park story and made it sound smaller on purpose. "Odd thing happened yesterday after church. Little girl at Mercer Park mistook me for her grandfather." Daniel's face arranged itself into sympathy. "That can be rough." "She used June's name." He did not move. That struck me first. Most men, hearing something actually odd, would lean forward or blink or say, "What do you mean?" Daniel only waited a beat and then asked in the same tone one uses around someone fragile. "How exactly?" I told him. "Not all of it. I left out the overheard phone call. I left out the book phrase at first, then added it as if it were an afterthought. She said, June used to say, rabbit voices are softer when somebody's sad." There, I had placed the stone between us and could watch the water. Daniel's expression softened further, which I would not have thought possible. "Tom," he said, June volunteered with children now and then. Church nursery, book drive, vacation Bible school one summer before she got too tired for it. Not with my book, she didn't. No. He folded one ankle over the other knee and clasped his hands. Grief does strange things with specificity. You hear one old phrase in a child's mouth, and the mind starts building connections because it wants them. Because it wants them. The sentence went through me like a thin blade. Not because it was cruel. It was not cruel. That was the trouble. It was the exact kind of tender correction that can leave a man with nowhere dignified to put his anger. "She knew June's name," I said. June was known. That woman at the park acted as though Daniel interrupted with a gentleness so polished it almost passed for care. "Tom, listen to me. Loneliness can turn ordinary overlaps into significance. I say that with love. You've been carrying a lot of quiet for a long time." For a second I could not answer because what I felt was not only suspicion now, but insult. Not loud insult, the subtler kind. The kind that rests a hand on your shoulder while deciding which part of your reality is too inconvenient to let stand. "I'm not imagining what the child said. I didn't say you were. But you're saying it doesn't mean anything. I'm saying there may be kinder explanations than the ones your mind reached for first." Kinder. The word lodged. I looked at the room around him. At the side table with magazines aligned into a perfect fan. At the coasters scented beneath mugs no one had used. At the framed photo of him and June at a church fundraiser years ago, both smiling in that public, hard-working way people do when they want to look like a family that can be counted on. It occurred to me then that Daniel had answered too quickly, not because he knew nothing, but because he had an established way of answering. "Do you remember," I asked June, "ever mentioning a child around Anna's silence this time?" "Not long, but different." Then he said, "Tom, do you know?" "You're certain?" He gave the smallest sigh. "I'm certain that if June had something serious to tell you, she'd have told you. It was such an ordinary sentence. In another house, another year, I might have accepted it on the spot. Instead, it made the skin along my arms go tight. Because that was not true. June had kept things from me all the time in the last years with Anna. Not lies, exactly. She omitted before she lied. She softened before she withheld. She chose calmer versions of reality until calm became its own distorter. If Daniel had known my wife at all, and he knew that too. I said I found a shopping list in her hand yesterday. Daniel did move then. Only a fraction. Shoulders lifted, then stilled. What sort of shopping list? Formula. He looked at me very steadily. June donated things. Formula? Yes, sometimes. Church pantry. Families in need. From my linen closet. The words came out before I intended them to. Daniel's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. What was in your linen closet? I told him about the washcloths, not the nightlight, not yet. He gave a quiet laugh meant to ease me. Tom, I can explain that in 2 seconds. June used your closet for overflow storage all the time when church drives were going on. So did I, for that matter. Lord knows your house had more room than mine once you stopped using Anna's room for guests. There it was. Neat, plausible, almost affectionate in its common sense. The kind of answer a man could accept if he needed the world to go back in place more than he needed it to be true. Did she? I asked. She did. And because his tone was so calm, because the explanation had handles on it, because men like me are trained from boyhood to distrust the embarrassing theater of intuition, I nearly thanked him. I nearly let the whole thing shrink to Sunday nerves and an old man's susceptibility to strange children. Then Daniel added, You really do need to be careful not to go hunting patterns right now. Need to be careful. Go hunting patterns. He meant it kindly. That was what chilled me. He meant to close the matter not by force, but by assigning me a level of fragility that made further questions feel indecent. I rose. So that's all you think this is? I think this is exactly the kind of thing grief can do when it doesn't have enough daily life around it, he said. And I think if there were anything more, June would have protected you from confusion. Protected you. Not told you. Protected you. I had heard enough. On the drive home, I became angry with myself for not pressing harder, then angrier still, because some part of me had wanted Daniel's explanation to work. Wanted it so badly, I could feel the effort of it all through my chest. If the church pantry story held, then the house was only cluttered with charity. If Daniel was right, then the child at the park was a collision of phrases and names. If I was indeed hunting patterns, then I was still the sort of man whose grief could be managed by more reasonable people. By the time I parked in my own driveway, that last thought had done the most damage. I went inside through the front for once. The hall still held the faint, cool scent of the air return and the cedar block I kept in the coat closet. On the stair wall, Anna smiled from her school portrait ribbon in her hair, and I could no longer look at the photograph without thinking about the ribbon in the book and the child at the park speaking June's private phrase. The house seemed orderly in a way that had begun to look staged. I went to the dining room. The sideboard was cherry dark and square-shouldered, built by June's father before he died. She kept the family albums in the lower left cabinet and the formal table linens in the right. I opened the album cabinet and set the 3 thick books on the table one by one. The first covered the years before Anna's adolescence, Christmas pageants, beach trips, a pumpkin patch. Anna on a bicycle too big for her, while I ran behind one-handed because she had shouted that letting go was the only way to teach her. The second carried high school, college, the first bad boyfriend whose name I barely remembered, then the years after that, where photographs grew fewer and more careful, as if the family had collectively decided that only the manageable versions of each other deserved acid-free sleeves. The third album began the year before June got sick. I turned pages slowly. Anna appeared at Easter 1 year thin, but smiling in a cardigan June had bought her. Then a Thanksgiving shot from across the room. Daniel carving June by the sink, me reaching for a serving bowl. Anna half cut off at the frame edge looking down. Christmas after that, no. Anna. A 4th of July cookout. No Anna. Church barbecue, no Anna. There were enough pictures to prove life had continued. But around the years that mattered, the album thinned badly like a smile going careful. I knew intellectually that this could happen in any family under strain. Fewer photos get taken when times are bad. People stop documenting what they cannot bear to archive. But June had documented everything. Not compulsively, faithfully. That was different. She saved grocery store snapshots and blurry holiday candids other people would have thrown out because she hated the arrogance of pretending only the best-lit moments counted. So why were these years so spare? I pulled the second album back toward me and compared the sleeves. There were faint pressure lines where photographs had once rested and been removed. Not from every page. Not enough to announce theft, enough to suggest selection. My pulse began to thud in my ears. I carried the third album to the den and spread it on the rug beside the low shelves. If June had removed photos, she might have tucked them elsewhere. She tucked everything elsewhere. Recipes in books, receipts in vases, church bulletins in seed catalogs, sympathy cards inside winter scarves. A housekeeper by instinct, a squirrel by method. The den desk sat under the window narrow drawers, and one lower cabinet where June had kept stationery, spare reading glasses, and the family calendars after each year ended. I opened the top drawer. Pen stamps, 2 dried-out glue sticks, 1 pad of floral note cards, and a little brass paperweight shaped like an apple. The second drawer held church directories and tax envelopes. The third stuck halfway. I braced one hand against the desk and pulled harder. Inside were calendars. June bought the same kind every year, slim, month-at-a-glance wall calendars, with enough room to note appointments, birthdays, church events, and recipe plans for holidays. After the year passed, she folded them and put them away, saying memory should have a paper trail. I took out the stack for the years around Anna's disappearance and set them on the desk. The paper smelled faintly sour with age and storage. The first calendar I opened was the year of the Thanksgiving memory. On May 14th, the date from the formula card, the square contained only 2 words in June's hand-drop pantry. That was all. May 15th, choir supper. May 16th, call. She had begun abbreviating oncology appointments that spring when her own body first started making secret plans without permission. My throat tightened at the sight of it. For one wild, weak moment, I wanted the pantry note to settle everything. Of course. Church pantry. Daniel had said as much. Formula could belong to charity. Children's things could belong to donation overflow. The house could go back to being merely sorrowful instead of deceptive. Then I noticed the ink. June wrote the month entries in blue. The words "drop pantry" were in black, darker than the rest, and the pressure of the pen on the paper had a hesitation in it I did not recognize. Not a forgery, nothing so theatrical, an overwriting, as if something else had once been there and then had been covered or rewritten later by the same hand or another careful enough to imitate her speed. I lifted the page to the light. There, beneath the black letters, I could just make out the ghost of erased blue loops. Not enough to read, enough to know the square had held different words once. I sat down hard in June's desk chair. The room looked back at me with its shelves and framed prints and lamp and the books still open on the side table. A sensible man could say, calendars get rewritten all the time. Plans change. Pantry drop could replace doctor could replace lunch. Lunch could replace anything. Yet the altered square sat exactly on the date of the formula list, and the coincidence of that was beginning to stretch past what I could hold under accident. I heard the front door open. For a second my heart leapt in my throat before my mind caught up and remembered that no one came through that door anymore without knocking. Then I realized I must not have latched it fully when I came in. Tom, a voice called, "Evan Morales." I had forgotten I texted him before leaving Daniel's house. Need your eyes on something when you can, not emergency, just need another mind. Evan was my godson, though not by church technicality anymore, since people stopped using those words in earnest and started using them mostly for baptisms and stationery. His mother and June had been friends since college. After his mother died, June fed him through law school holidays and spoke to him in the kitchen as if practical affection could plug certain holes in a man's life. He was 42 now, family law by specialty. Not flashy, not sentimental, one of the few people under 50 whose presence in my house never felt like a visit from another country. In here I called. He appeared in the doorway with his coat still on and took in the desk, the calendars, the albums on the floor, and my face. Evan had his mother's restraint. His concern showed mostly in what he chose not to say. "You look like hell," he said. "Thank you." He came in, shut the door with his foot, and leaned one hip against the bookcase. "What happened?" I handed him the formula card first, then pointed to the calendar square. He read the list, then adjusted his glasses and bent closer to the calendar page. "That's overwritten," he said. Relief and dread moved through me together. "So, I'm not imagining that?" "No." He looked again. Maybe not maliciously, but yes. Something was changed. I told him then about the park. The child, the phrase, the overheard phone line. Daniel's response, the closet. As I spoke, the words began sounding less like the private machinery of an anxious mind and more like a sequence one could place on a table and walk around. Evan did not interrupt. He took off his glasses only once when I repeated Daniel's line about protecting me from confusion. When I finished, the room held quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Did June ever mention temporary guardianship to you?" "No." She wouldn't necessarily use that phrase even if she had. "Are you telling me that's what you think this is?" "I'm telling you," he said carefully, "that families do strange things around instability. They call them temporary because they need to believe that. Sometimes they are. Sometimes temporary lasts a lot longer than anybody wants to admit." I looked at him. He went on, still careful. "A struggling parent gets sick, relapses, goes in and out of treatment, lacks housing, whatever the reason is. Someone close steps in for the child. Everybody says it's just for now. Everybody tells themselves they're preserving options. Then months turn to years. New routines form. The child attaches where the child lives, and the people who arranged it begin to act as though delay is kindness." The last sentence landed harder than the first. Would I have had to know, I asked, legally? Maybe, not immediately, depending on paternity guardianship, who signed, what kind of emergency structure they used, whether the parent had rights limited without termination. He stopped. Morally is a different question. The book lay open on the side table, June's inscription visible from where I sat. The room had gone so still I could hear the house settling a soft pop from the old wood near the window trim. "I keep thinking," I said, "that if there's more here, it can't be much more. Some small arrangement, some confusion, something June helped with and meant to explain later." Evan looked at the desk, the altered square, the formula note, and then at me. Maybe. He did not sound convinced. We spent the next hour going through the calendars. Most pages were innocent enough. Doctor, church, groceries, weather notations June made in little circles because she liked to prove to herself that spring always came back even when her body began to fail her. Then another irregularity. September of that same year. A square where blue writing had been crossed out with one hard black line, then replaced nursery room. No name attached, no context. The next week, same black pen D, drop bags at Jay's. D could have meant Daniel. J could have meant Julie from choir, or Janet from the pantry, or anyone. Yet now the whole paper world of the house had begun to look like a second language I no longer trusted myself to read. Evan took pictures on his phone. When we stopped, dusk had deepened outside the den windows. I had not turned on any lamps except the one beside the reading chair, which left the desk half in shadow and made the calendar pages look older, more brittle and more accusatory than they likely were. "I want someone else to look at the guardianship angle," Evan said. "Not a lawyer trying to turn this into a case. Someone older. Someone who's seen the county's nonsense for years and won't dramatize it." "Who?" "There's a woman at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Marion Bell. Retired county clerk. Family court for 26 years. Mean as winter and write more often than she's pleasant about it. In any other circumstance, I might have smiled. I did not. Can she see documents? She can read dates and tell us what kind of structure they suggest. She's not giving legal advice. She's giving old truth. Old truth." The phrase stayed with me after he left. That night, the house became specific in its wrongness. Not haunted, not melodramatic. Worse, it felt edited. I went room to room, not because I expected to find a child standing in the dark, but because every space now seemed capable of containing a small withheld fact. In the dining room, the sideboard drawers slid open with that polished wooden hush I had always loved. Now I listened to it as if hush itself had motive. In the kitchen, I noticed that the blue mug June favored was not on its usual hook, but had been moved to the back row months ago and never put forward again, which suddenly reminded me of the last year of her life, when she began clearing the visible counters as if preparing for company she refused to name. In the upstairs hall, I paused by the linen closet and ran my finger again across the painted-over pencil marks. There were 3, not 2. One lower one at a height for perhaps a 3-year-old one above it. The top line had a little wavering tick beside it, as if someone had started to write initials and stopped. I stood in the dark hallway with one hand against the frame and remembered June kneeling in almost that same posture years ago, measuring Anna for a winter coat against the wall because she didn't trust store charts. Anna had giggled and wriggled. June had told her to hold still or she would buy her sleeves fit for an orangutan. That was the word she used. Orangutan. Anna laughed so hard she snorted. And suddenly the memory hurt differently. Not simply because those 2 people were gone from me, but because I could not stop imagining June kneeling there again years later with another child at the frame, pencil in hand, doing the same domestic measuring in a house where I apparently knew less than I had believed about my own life. I slept badly again. The next morning I found the first whisper, not spoken, left. I was making toast when I noticed a paper edge protruding from the crack between the microwave and the wall. I would have thought it was junk mail blown by the vent, if not for the fact that nothing in my kitchen drifted unless I drifted it myself. I pulled it free. It was a church nursery sign-in slip folded twice. Green carbon copy paper gone faint. At the top, Sunday childcare. Under name of child, only the first name Lila. Under parent/guardian initials, AW. I sat down at the table with the slip in one hand and the toast burning slowly behind me. A W. Anna Whitaker. The smoke alarm did not go off, but the smell of over-browned bread moved through the room, sharp as reprimand. I rose, switched off the toaster, came back and read the slip again. Date 4 years ago. Age 2. Notes shy at first. Crackers okay. No nuts. No nuts. The phrase was so ordinary, it broke something in me. It was the kind of small note mothers give nursery volunteers when a child is too little to explain herself properly. Not dramatic, not sentimental, just the practical language of care. And there, in faded green carbon in my hand, was evidence that my daughter, my supposedly absent, unreachable, unsalvageable daughter, had at some point signed a child into a church nursery with a first name that matched the little girl at the park. The slip had not been in the den, not in the binders, not in the album cabinet. It had been hidden badly in the kitchen, as if somebody had once tucked it away fast and then forgotten to retrieve it. Or not forgotten. Left it where a certain kind of wife might know how to find it and a certain kind of husband would never think to look. My knees went weak enough that I braced a hand on the table. I thought of Daniel's face as he told me not to go hunting patterns. I thought of June's grocery list. I thought of the little girl's brown eyes at the pond. And I thought with an ache, almost too intimate to name, of my daughter standing in some church hallway 4 years ago with a child beside her, writing down crackers. Okay? No nuts for another woman to mind while she sat in a pew or went to the restroom or tried to pray, or simply needed 2 free hands for 10 minutes. I had not known. The toast smell thickened. I opened the window over the sink and let the cold air in. For a long time I did not move beyond that. Then I slid the nursery slip under the rabbit book's cover and went to the den, because I could not bear to leave the 2 things apart now. The book had changed meaning again. It was no longer only a clue linked to a phrase. It was becoming the place where pieces of the truth seemed to gather, as if the house itself knew where the child had entered the family's language first. When I lifted the book to tuck in the slip, something else fell out. A photograph no larger than a wallet print face down. It had been hidden behind the front flyleaf. I picked it up and turned it over. Anna at maybe 28, maybe 29. Thin, yes. Tired around the eyes, yes. But sober-looking in the way even fathers can learn to recognize after years of fearing the opposite. She stood in profile by some playground fence I did not know, hair pulled back poorly, holding the hand of a little girl in a yellow coat too bright for the weather. The child's face was turned away. On the back in June's hand, only 3 words. Not yet, Tom. My whole body went cold. Not yet, Tom. Of all the things June could have left behind, those were the cruelest possible words because they were so perfectly hers. Not a confession, not a truth, a postponement, a small domestic stay against reality. The phrase of a woman who had spent the last years of our marriage delaying hard knowledge in the hope that timing itself might grow mercy. I sank into the chair and held the photograph by its edges as though skin oil could erase whatever remained hidden inside it. Not yet. Meaning she had seen them. Meaning she had known enough to write that. Meaning at some point she had chosen not to tell me, not because there was nothing to tell, but because she meant to tell me later when later was gentler or safer or more survivable for one or all of us. The room blurred. I loved my wife. That is the plain center of it. Even then, with anger rising through grief like heat through a closed room, I loved her. And because I loved her, what hurt was not merely the concealment. It was how exactly the concealment belonged to her. Not a dramatic lie, not theatrical betrayal. 3 small words carrying an entire marriage's fatal weakness. Not yet. There are some men who get angry cleanly. I never have. My anger always passes first through sorrow and comes out changed. I sat there a long time with the photograph in one hand and the book open on my lap, feeling both newly bereaved and newly insulted by the dead. At noon, I called Evan and read him the words on the back. He was quiet, then said, "Bring everything to the library. Marion's there till 4. The county library occupied an old red-brick Carnegie building downtown with a newer annex stitched onto the back like an apology. Marion Bell sat at a long side table near local records, her yellow legal pencil tucked behind one ear exactly as Evan had promised. 70 if she was a day spare, as wire-white hair pinned back without sentiment, navy cardigan buttoned to the throat. She looked at me once and then at the stack in my hands and seemed to decide we were not there for pleasantries. "You the widower," she said. "I suppose that narrows it down less than it once did. That almost won me something like approval." Evan introduced us, then laid out the calendar pages, the formula list, the nursery slip, and finally the photograph, though I kept that last one closest to myself. Marion put on reading glasses that hung from a chain and examined each item the way a doctor might examine a bruise to determine not merely its size, but the shape of the hand that left it. She tapped the nursery slip first. A W could be anybody. "It could," Evan said. She glanced at me. "But not likely, I assume. Not likely." She moved to the calendar pages. This square was altered later. Doesn't prove malice. Proves discomfort. Tap. This one too. Tap. People rewrite domestic records when they want the facts to look less emotional. I had never heard it put that way. "Can temporary guardianship happen without grandparents being told?" I asked. Marion leaned back slightly. "Legally, plenty can happen without decency involved. Depends who had standing, who signed, whether paternity was established, whether it was emergency placement, informal kinship arrangement, hospital, discharge recommendation, any number of things. Family court sees a lot of just for now." She looked at the photograph in my hand, then at me again. Question isn't only what was legal. Question is who built a story around it and who got kept outside that story. Her bluntness steadied me more than kindness would have. "What does this suggest to you?" Evan asked. Marion slid the nursery slip closer, reading the date again. Then the formula card, then the altered calendar square. She tapped May 14th with one fingernail. It suggests, she said, that someone in this family was preparing for a child's practical needs and then smoothing the paper trail after. It suggests the arrangement did not begin and end in one crisis weekend because nobody writes formula into a widow's kitchen list and nursery room into a household calendar if the child isn't orbiting the home life in some repeated way. I heard the phrase repeated way and felt my mouth go dry. Repeated, I said. She nodded once. Temporary care can be renewed, informally or formally. People do 6 months, then another 6. Or they use the language of temporary to keep everybody obedient while daily life hardens around the child elsewhere. How long, I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. Marian folded her hands over the papers. Years. The word did not land all at once. It entered me by degrees, finding every hollow place grief had left and filling it with something colder. Years. Not an emergency, not one bad month, not one weekend where Anna had done the best she could and then vanished again. Years long enough for a child to learn a phrase from June's reading voice. Years long enough for formula to turn into crackers, then nursery slips, then height marks painted over in a closet. Years long enough for my daughter to have been a mother in some unstable, compromised, half-recognized way while I was being told there was nothing left to understand except absence. I looked at the date on the nursery slip again. 4 years ago. Anna had still been alive then. Not thriving, perhaps. Not safe, perhaps. But alive. Signing a child into church care under initials instead of her full name. Near enough to my world that the paper reached my kitchen. Near enough to June's world that she tucked a photograph into a book and wrote, "Not yet." The old belief I had lived in that Anna had cut herself free from us completely and drifted beyond all family reach before death took the choice away did not survive that table. It did not bend. It collapsed. I sat there in the public quiet of the library with the smell of old bindings and carpet cleaner in the air, Marian's pencil resting across the altered calendar, Evan silent beside me, and understood that the timeline I had called my daughter's disappearance had not been empty at all. It had contained a child. The word years stayed with me all the way home, not as sound, but as pressure. It had weight to it, not just duration, accusation. A child had not flickered through the edge of our family story for a weekend or one bad season. A child had lasted long enough to require list slips, altered calendars, new routines painted over marks, long enough for June to write "Not Yet Tom" on the back of a photograph and then die before yet arrived. Long enough for me to have lived my whole life inside a false shape of absence without once feeling the floor give under me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house looked different in a way I could not have explained to another person without sounding theatrical. It had not changed physically. White trim still needed paint on the west side where weather caught it hardest. The porch swing still hung slightly lower on the left chain because I never got around to replacing the bracket. The curtains in the front parlor still sat exactly half open from the morning, but the place had lost innocence. It no longer looked like a home that had held sorrow honestly. It looked like a home that had once assisted in distributing sorrow selectively. That is a hard thing to admit about the place where you have brushed your teeth, paid your bills, folded your wife's sweaters after she was dead, because no one else should have done it. I went inside and did not turn on the kitchen light. Evening had deepened enough that the windows were dark mirrors now. My reflection moved back at me in the glass above the sink, old and sharp, and less patient than the man who had come home from church 2 days before, believing the past was painful but settled. The den lamp still burned where I had left it. I had stopped worrying about the electric bill in small ways after June died. There are economies. Grief teaches, and economies, it cancels. I took the photograph, the nursery slip, the formula card, the altered calendar pages, and the book into the den and laid them out on the low table in front of the reading chair. Then I stood over them the way a minister might stand over communion elements and know the ritual had grown more dangerous than the congregation realized. The book went at the top without my planning it. I noticed that afterward and let it stay there. The old rabbit, with its rubbed-away eye and taped spine, now presided over everything else: the photograph, the list, the nursery slip, the altered dates. Once it had been the thing I turned to when I wanted memory softened into shape. Now it looked more like an accusation that had learned patience. I called Ruth Ann Kessler after 7. I did not especially want to call her. Ruth Ann was the kind of woman people trust too quickly because she carried peppermints in her purse and remembered whose husband had which surgery. But she had asked after my tomatoes in church in March, and at the time that had struck me merely as one more weary church lady habit. Now it sounded to me like nerves taking the long way around a dangerous subject. She answered on the 5th ring. "Tom." Her voice lifted at the end, not from pleasure exactly, from apprehension. "Ruth Ann, I hope I'm not interrupting supper." No. Just me here." A pause. "You all right?" That phrase had begun to take on its own smell, and I was coming to hate it. "I'd like to ask you something. About Anna." Quiet, long enough that I could hear the small ticking clock in my den, and faint over the line a television turned low in some other room at her house. Finally, she said, "What about Anna?" I kept my voice level. "I found a church nursery slip with her initials on it, and a little girl's name." No answer. "Ruth Ann." A breath came through the phone, thin and shaky. "Tom, this isn't something did you know?" Still, she did not answer directly. That in itself was answer enough. I think I said more quietly now that if there's anything decent left to do in this matter, it starts with somebody in this town speaking to me like I am the father of my own child. When people are frightened, they almost always choose one of 2 directions. They harden into denial or soften into guilt. Ruth Ann softened so quickly I could hear it happen. "Not on the phone," she whispered. The whisper changed the room around me. A private warning scene, Evan would have called it. I only knew that the hairs along my arms lifted. Then, where another pause. Then, "Your kitchen. Tomorrow morning. Early." Why my kitchen? Because it was June's room, I thought. Because confessions seemed smaller there. Because if Ruth Ann had once been part of any system that managed me, she might need the dead woman's counters and dish towels between us to say what she had helped hide. But what she said was, "Because I don't want people seeing my car in your driveway after dark." Then she hung up. I slept less than the night before. Not because my mind raced. It had gone beyond racing into something flatter and more exact. I lay awake hearing house sounds I had lived with for years and no longer trusted. The soft shift of the return vent upstairs. The old baseboard settling in the front hall. The refrigerator motor cutting on and off below. Once, just after midnight, I went down and stood in the kitchen without turning on the light, listening to the silence between mechanical sounds, the way one listens for something alive in the walls. Nothing moved, yet the room felt inhabited by intention. The next morning, I woke before dawn, showered, shaved badly enough to nick my chin, and put on coffee before 6. I did what June used to do when somebody important was coming over, and I needed my hands occupied. Wiped the counters, straightened the dish towel, set out 2 mugs. Though I did not know if Ruth Ann would stay long enough to drink from one. Then I stood at the window over the sink and watched the yard go from black to gray. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cold March air leaking in around the old window casing. The dogwood branches scratched lightly in the breeze. Somewhere down the street, a newspaper hit concrete with a flat slap. Ordinary morning sounds. Nothing about them touched the fact that my daughter's life had been going on in pieces near the edges of mine, while people who loved to say for the best arranged who got to know what. At 6:40, Ruth Ann's small silver sedan turned into the driveway with the lights still on. She sat behind the wheel a moment after cutting the engine. I watched her through the curtains, shoulders hunched, both hands on the wheel, gathering herself like a witness walking toward a stand. I let her in through the back. She stepped into the kitchen carrying herself carefully as if she did not trust the floor to hold. She had put on lipstick too pink for that hour, the kind of detail that told me she had dressed under strain. She accepted coffee only because refusing it would have been more noticeable than taking it. Her wedding band flashed when she lifted the mug, then turned and turned because she could not stop twisting it. I did not offer her comfort. That surprised me about myself, and I did not apologize for it. "What did you know?" I asked. Ruth Ann took one breath too many before answering. "Not everything." "That isn't an answer." "I know." She looked toward the window and then back at me as if she wished some lesser version of the truth might drift in from outside and relieve her of duty. "I saw Anna," she said finally, "with the little girl." The words themselves did not strike as hard as the image they made. My daughter not as rumor or inference or handwriting, but physically present with the child, standing somewhere real, breathing, carrying, mothering, where I asked, at church. Once in the hallway by the nursery, once outside after the women's lunch. How long ago? 4 years. Maybe a little more. She looked. Ruth Ann stopped. "Say it." Thin, tired, but clear-eyed. More clear-eyed than I'd seen her in years. I had to put my hand on the table to steady it. Not myself. The table. That was the lie I used for 1 full second. And the child, Ruth Ann's eyes, filled in that immediate guilty way some people's do when memory finally outruns self-protection. Beautiful little thing. Yellow coat on her one day. She clung to Anna's skirt at first, then kept putting her hand up to Anna's face. "Like children do. Children do." I waited. Ruth Ann swallowed. Daniel was there. Not the first time I saw them, the second. He said it was a delicate situation, that Anna was trying, that June was helping quietly, that Tom did not need more confusion unless things held. The use of my name that way made me feel less like a man than a case file. "You believed him?" She shut her eyes briefly. "I wanted to. Because he sounded sensible." There it was. The whole rot of it in one church lady word. "Did June tell you not to speak to me?" Ruth Ann stared at the rim of her mug. Not directly. That answer chilled me more than a yes would have. "What did she say?" She said there were things still being worked out. She said Anna wasn't steady enough for everything to be named aloud yet. She said if there was to be a proper homecoming, it had to happen without everybody pulling at the same loose threads. Proper homecoming. That was my wife all over. Not truth, not reunion, not family reckoning. Homecoming. As if pain could be seated, fed, and made presentable if one chose the right tablecloth. I said, "Did Anna know I wasn't being told?" Ruth Ann's eyes rose to mine then, and what I saw in them answered before she spoke. "I think she knew some of it," she said softly. "I don't know how much. I only know the day in the hallway she looked upset, not loud, tight. She kept saying, 'I can do this part myself.' Daniel kept saying, 'Not yet, not this way.' Not yet." The same words June had written on the back of the photograph. My skin went cold. Ruth Ann went on in a rush now, as if once started she had to outrun her own courage. And one time, I shouldn't even know this, but I was in the pantry room by the fellowship hall and heard Anna say she was tired of people talking about her like she was weather. Those were the words. "I'm tired of y'all talking about me like I'm weather." And then June said something too low for me to catch, and Anna cried without making any noise. She just stood there with her shoulders shaking while she held that child. I turned away from Ruth Ann because I could not bear for her to see my face. The kitchen window above the sink showed my reflection against the yard. Old man, blue shirt, shoulders too rigid. This was the room where June and I had cleaned up after Thanksgivings, after funerals, after Christmas dinners, where Anna laughed too hard at something slightly cruel, and I mistook that sharpness for evidence she could withstand more than she could. This was the room where June had once stood with one hand over her mouth while Anna slept off a bad night in the guest room and said to me, We cannot keep making every conversation a referendum on her. At the time, I had thought she was defending Anna from me. Now I wondered if she had been defending me from Anna, which is a much uglier thought. When was the last time you saw her? I asked. Ruth Ann rubbed her wedding band again. A Christmas market at church. 3 years and some months ago. The little girl was with a younger woman I didn't know then. Later, Daniel said she was helping with childcare while Anna sorted out housing. He always had phrases. You know that. Oh, I knew it now. Did you ever see Anna here? I asked without turning. The kitchen went very quiet. Ruth Ann. No, she said quickly. Too quickly. I turned back. No. She looked stricken, and I understood at once that I had asked the one question she feared. Not inside, she whispered. The word inside did more damage than any other word that morning. What do you mean, not inside? She stared at the mug in both hands as if it might carry her out of the room. One summer cookout. June invited a few church people. Daniel was here. I came late to drop off a pie. I saw Anna by the side yard fence, outside the gate. The little girl was with her. I thought maybe they were heading in. I could hear my own breathing. Did they? No. Who spoke to her, Daniel? Then June came out. The room seemed to tilt slightly under me. And me, I asked. Where was I? Ruth Ann winced before answering. In the backyard, at the grill. You had your back turned. I did not remember that. Or perhaps I did, and had filed it where all unbearable things get filed when no one gives them names. I saw flashes, only heat from the grill. July bugs men with paper plates. Daniel saying he would check on the ice, a bright yellow something beyond the fence. No, maybe. God help me. Maybe. What happened? I asked. Ruth Ann shook her head. I couldn't hear. I only saw Anna arguing quietly. June looked terrified, not angry. Daniel looked. She searched. Certain. Like he had already decided what was responsible. How long were they out there? A few minutes. Then Anna left. And the child. With her. I gripped the chair back so hard the old wood creaked. The betrayal was no longer general, no longer theoretical. It had shape now. My daughter had stood at my own fence with her child while I turned meat on a grill for people who would later tell me she had drifted too far to be reached. The difference between absence and managed exclusion opened under me like a pit. Ruth Ann set down her mug. Tom, I am sorry. I should have said something. I know that. I looked at her and believed that she was sorry, which did not help. Why didn't you? Because Daniel said you'd all agreed this was temporary. Because June said timing mattered. Because Anna had had bad periods before, and everyone kept speaking as if one wrong entrance would blow up whatever fragile progress she had. Because... She stopped, then said the truest thing at last, because I let people who sounded calm make me feel hysterical for even asking. That was the first honest sentence of the morning not delivered by me. I thanked her when she left. I do not know why. Habit, perhaps, or the remnants of old civilization around grief. Once the door closed behind her, I stood in the kitchen and knew I could not remain there another second without becoming some soft, stunned thing I no longer had patience for. I went upstairs to Anna's room. I had opened the room after she died. Yes, cleaned it, sorted it, boxed things, then half restored it into a compromise between memorial and utility. It was never a shrine. June disliked shrines inside houses. The dead don't need staging, she once said, after a cousin preserved her husband's recliner untouched for 9 years. Yet we had not truly given the room away either. The bed remained. The quilt June's mother made remained. One bookshelf of childhood books remained. The desk stayed under the window, though the drawers had been tidied as June put it during the period she was sick and unable to tolerate visible disorder. I had not opened those drawers fully in years. The room smelled of dry fabric, old paper, and that faint, stale sweetness upstairs rooms acquire when sun has warmed them through many seasons. Dust lay along the sill edge in a way that told me the room had not been opened much lately by anyone, which was exactly as it should have been, and yet no longer reassured me. I crossed to the desk. The top drawer held pencils, 3 dead pens, an old geometry compass, and a stack of index cards bound with a rubber band, gone brittle. The second drawer held stationery stamps and a lavender sachet that had lost its scent years back. The third drawer slid out halfway and stopped on something soft. I knelt. A pale dusting clung to the rear corner and to the underside of the drawer base. Not dust, not exactly. Finer, sweet, familiar in a way that struck the body before the mind. Baby powder. I touched it with one fingertip, and the scent lifted faintly enough to prove itself. I sat back on my heels. There was no honest reason for baby powder in my grown daughter's desk drawer in the years after she was supposedly too absent to bring a child near this house. None that fit the story I had lived in. Yet the scent was there, stubborn and domestic and humiliatingly ordinary. It transformed the room at once. This was no longer the half-preserved room of a daughter who had gone wrong and then gone away. It was a room someone had at least partly prepared for the passage of a child. I pulled the drawer all the way out. Behind it, taped to the back wall of the desk cavity, was a single adhesive hook like the kind June used to hang measuring spoons inside cabinets. A tiny thing. Why there? Beneath it, a faint circular scuff mark on the wood, as if something plastic had knocked lightly against it more than once. A diaper bag. A small pouch. Something hung there out of sight, while the drawer remained in place I could not know yet. But the idea of hidden use threaded through the room in a way I could feel physically. The house was no longer merely containing evidence. It had once accommodated a life I had not been permitted to join. I stood and turned slowly. The bed, the bookshelf, the closet, the faded yellow dress from 8th grade still hanging in the back because June always said formal dresses ought to be kept until the wearer objected personally. The room looked still, but stillness is not innocence. Sometimes it is aftermath. I went to the closet. Anna's old sneakers sat on the floor, laces knotted. Above them, a storage shelf held folded blankets, 2 shoeboxes, and a wicker basket. I took down the basket first. Hair ribbons, dried up nail polish, ticket stubs, a bracelet missing stones, and caught between a scarf and a rolled-up T-shirt, a packet of travel tissues with cartoon rabbits on the front. Newer than the rest. Not recent, but not childhood old either. Under that, a child's plastic spoon, pale green, the bowl end chewed in the way teething children destroy the objects meant to feed them. I stared at it until anger finally came clean for once. Not noisy anger. Better than that. The kind that straightens the spine. I took the spoon, the tissue packet, the drawer, the baby powder trace, the nursery slip, the altered calendars, the formula card, and the photograph downstairs to the dining room. Then I called Evan. "I need you here," I said. He came within 40 minutes with a legal pad and the expression of a man who had decided not to underestimate whatever was waiting for him. We spread everything across the dining room table by year. That was my decision, not his. The first deliberate strategic move I made in the whole affair, though I did not name it that then. I refused to let the house remain a haze of impressions. If people had curated time against me, I would reorder time in plain view. We started with the year of the formula card. May 14th, then the pantry overright, then September nursery room, then the nursery slip 4 years ago, then the photograph, then the rabbit phrase at the park now. The dates sat there under the chandelier as steady as bones. Evan wrote columns. What we knew, what we inferred, what required confirmation. He did not speak like a man humoring a grieving elder anymore. He spoke like a lawyer who had seen family cruelty wear cardigans. The key, he said, is not to leap where the papers don't yet carry us. "I'm past leaping," I said. "I'm building." He nodded once, and I saw that he understood the difference. We made a second list what needed outside confirmation. Guardianship possibilities. Pediatric records if any lawful path existed to identify providers or billing addresses. Church nursery logs if they still kept old copies. Who the caregiver from the park was. How Daniel connected to her. And perhaps most important of all, whether Anna's contact with the child had been framed to her as temporary, in the same way it had been framed to everyone else. At the edge of all that sat one quieter horror. Neither of us wrote down that my own words may have helped make the arrangement morally possible. It came back to me in pieces as we worked. Not all at once. That is never how memory punishes. First, the Thanksgiving scene. Then another night, much later after Anna had missed 2 calls, and June sat at the kitchen counter with both hands around the blue mug, saying she did not know if pushing harder would help or harm. I had said tired, ashamed of my own tiredness. Maybe she needs to stay gone till she can be steady. I had meant I cannot survive another night of police calls and lies and ambulance lights and my own helplessness. But language does not care what we mean when others find use for what we say. If Daniel or June had taken that sentence as permission, no, not permission, worse, moral consensus, then I had helped build the gate my daughter later stood outside. I rose from the table and walked into the kitchen because suddenly I could not breathe enough in the dining room. The late afternoon light had turned the counters gold. The striped dish towel hung as I had left it. 2 clean mugs sat by the sink. Everything about the room still offered itself as stable and useful, yet now stability itself had grown suspect. The kitchen had been the engine room of our family's tone. Meals smoothing practical reassurances, side door conversations. Things postponed until after dessert, and then after church, and then after treatment, and then after she's had more time. If the lie had a native language, it was spoken here in a low domestic register. Evan came to the doorway, but did not cross into the room. "You all right?" he asked. "No." He let that stand. After a minute I said, "Do you know what shames me most?" He waited. That if someone had told me then there was a child, and Anna was trying, and things were messy and uncertain, I might have said, "Not yet too." I looked at the counter where June once rolled out pie crust with her sleeves pushed back. Not because I didn't love her, because I was tired enough to confuse relief with wisdom. Evan took off his glasses. "That's different from what Daniel did." "Is it?" "Yes." How he answered without softening it. "Because you were tired of chaos. He was invested in control." I leaned both hands on the sink. I still said it. "Yes," he said. "And now you're the only one in this story trying to make that sentence answerable." That did not absolve me. It did something better. It returned me to usefulness. We worked into evening. At some point I made sandwiches neither of us really wanted. Ham, mustard, rye bread, pickles on the side because June always said a good table should have one sharp thing on it. We ate standing at the counter over the paper spread like men fueling themselves at a job site. Near 8, Evan got a call back from a contact who worked in healthcare billing compliance. Not a favor exactly, more a cautious professional courtesy. He could not release patient information, but he could tell Evan whether a specific pediatric practice had historical billing under a mailing address if we had enough narrowing details. Evan gave him Daniel Mercer's address. The room seemed to still around the speakerphone voice. "Yes," the man said at last. "That address appears in archived guarantor records attached to pediatric billing from—" "Give me a second." "From a period spanning a little over 3 years. Not current, I cannot give names. 3 years. There it was again. Not a crisis, a span." Evan thanked him and ended the call. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I said Daniel paid pediatric bills, or was listed as responsible address. For 3 years. Yes. The fact of it entered the house like weather. The dining room, the kitchen, the hall, every room seemed to accept it differently. Daniel Mercer, who had looked at me in his controlled sitting room and suggested loneliness, had made me susceptible to pattern, had at minimum allowed his address to be used in connection with a child's care for years. The calm of that made him more frightening than any shouting man could have been. I expected rage. Instead, I felt a hard, settled clarity, as if some inner shaking had finally chosen direction. "I'm going to search the sideboard again," I said. Evan glanced at the clock. "Now." "Yes. Now." The dining room had gone dark around the overhead light. Outside the windows, the yard was black except for the porch lamp catching a slice of fence. The cherry sideboard stood against the wall, polished and dignified, as if it had never done anything but hold linen and memory properly. I opened the left cabinet again and removed the albums. Then the stack of old place cards, the mahogany napkin rings, the Christmas crackers from some year June thought would be funny, and nobody had used. I ran my hand along the inside back panel. Solid. Then lower, near the drawer support, where the wood gave not with a click but with a slight hollow response under my knuckles. I frowned and knocked again. One side was dense. The center sounded thin. Evan crouched beside me. "What is it?" I did not answer. I slid out the middle drawer completely. The drawer had always looked shallower than the cabinet depth ought to allow, but I had never cared enough to notice. At the back, fitted flush and stained to match, was a thin panel of cardboard-backed veneer attached by 2 old upholstery tacks and 1 strip of tape gone amber with age. June's father had built the sideboard. He believed in compartments, not for secrets, for silver-polished candlesticks, extension cords. Men of his generation hid practical things in furniture because hardware stores were far and winters were long. My hands shook once and then steadied. I fetched the small paring knife from the dining room side tray, slid the flat of the blade beneath the tape edge, and lifted. The veneer gave with a dry crackle. Behind it sat a stack of photographs wrapped in a yellowed dish towel. Not letters, not wills, not a single explosive paper. Photographs. That almost undid me more than anything else. Because photographs meant somebody had not simply managed law and language. Somebody had managed sight. I set the bundle on the table and unfolded the towel. The first images were at church. Anna standing near the side entrance in a denim jacket, hair pulled back, face thinner, but unmistakably alive. In one, she knelt with the little girl, Lila, I no longer doubted it, buttoning the child's yellow coat. In another, June stood 5 feet away with a paper cup in her hand, watching them both with an expression so pained and tender that I had to look away. The next set were outside a grocery store parking lot, Daniel's car visible in the background. The child in a cart seat, Anna leaning over her. Then a shot of Daniel carrying a diaper bag, while Anna signed something on a clipboard. I laid them out one by one. Evan said nothing. Good for him. Then I came to the photograph that ended whatever remained of my old false belief. Summer light, my backyard, the grill under the maple tree. Red checked tablecloth on the folding table. Paper lanterns June had hung for a church supper. I was there in the background, turned 3/4 away, one hand on the grill handle, talking to someone off frame. Inside the fence, Daniel stood near the gate with a plate in his hand, body angled outward. And just beyond the fence on the public side of my own yard stood Anna, holding the little girl against her hip. The child had one arm around Anna's neck. Anna's face was turned toward the house, not hopeful exactly, not even pleading, wary, braced, as if she had come close enough to be seen and had already been told what the answer would be. The gate between us was closed. I did not hear myself make a sound, but Evan looked at me fast, so I must have. Everything in me went cold and hot at once. The backyard cookout returned in shattered fragments, smoke from the grill. Daniel saying he would check on the ice. June stepping through the gate with a dish towel in one hand. My own back turned while my daughter stood not 20 feet away, holding my granddaughter outside the boundary of my property during a family gathering in my own house. This was no longer omission, no longer delay, no longer paperwork given the benefit of time. This was exclusion with choreography. I set the photograph down carefully because my hands had begun to tremble. The dining room light made a bright, clean rectangle around the picture, while every part of the room beyond it seemed to recede. The gate between us was closed. There are truths that arrive with noise. This one arrived with an image so still it felt merciless. My daughter had not merely been somewhere out in the world, trying and failing and drifting in and out of temporary arrangements while I mourned her in advance. She had stood at the edge of my house with her child in her arms, while the family system that claimed to love her decided she should remain outside. And I had been there, not absent, there. That was the point of no return. Not the list, not the nursery slip, not even the pediatric billing at Daniel's address. This photograph. Because now the betrayal had location geometry and witness. The house had not merely failed to include her. It had been used to stage the terms of her exclusion. I looked up at Evan and heard my own voice come out quieter than it had ever sounded in my life. He kept her outside my fence. And for the first time since the child at the park called me Grandpa, I did not feel like a grieving man chasing pattern through old rooms. I felt like a father with evidence. He kept her outside my fence. The words seemed to remain in the dining room after I said them, as if the house itself needed time to hear what it had once helped conceal. Evan did not answer immediately. He stood at the far end of the table with one hand on the chair back, looking down at the photograph under the chandelier. My backyard, the checkered cloth, my own shoulder turned toward the grill, Daniel inside the gate, Anna outside it with the child in her arms. Even after all we had found, the image had a cruelty nothing else carried. It was not a document. It was not language. It was choreography. Somebody had arranged who stood where and who got to belong. At length, Evan said, "You know what this means." I kept looking at the photograph. Yes. You can't let him talk you back into softness. The sentence landed where it needed to. In another year, another house, I might have bristled at being handled that way by a man 26 years younger than me. But there are moments in a family when age stops being rank and becomes only weather. I was tired of weather. I needed direction. "I won't," I said. That too seemed to change something in the room. We stayed at the dining room table another hour, making the sort of plan I had once believed decent people ought never need inside a family. Yet family is exactly where such plans become necessary, because family is where truth is most often asked to wait politely outside until the table is ready for it. Evan wrote names and times in his legal pad. Daniel Mercer, Caleb Hart, Ruth Ann Kessler, Marion Bell on standby if formal clarification was needed. The younger woman from the park, whose name we had not yet confirmed, though Evan had already started pushing through the proper channels to identify the child care center tied to the nursery slip and to narrow down caregiver names from church and school contact lists. We did not need every piece before confronting Daniel. We already had enough to break the story he had built. The rest would matter for what came after. What about Caleb, I asked, Anna's former boyfriend, Lila's father? If nothing in this affair had grown even uglier than I already feared. The man had hovered at the edge of my daughter's final years like a bad habit nobody knew whether to condemn or pity. Unsteady work, too much self-pity. One of those men who seem forever surprised their own life has asked anything of them. I had blamed him often enough in private. Perhaps that had made Daniel's version of events easier to accept. Evan tapped the end of his pen against the table. "He'll fold before Daniel does." "You're certain?" "No, but men like Daniel build systems. Men like Caleb hide inside them." That sounded right. We decided on the den. I could have met them elsewhere. The church office, Daniel's sitting room, a lawyer's conference room with tissue set out in a square glass box. Any of those would have been easier. Easier was done. If the lie had been curated through the rooms of my house, then the truth belonged in those same rooms. Specifically in the den where June had kept the books and calendars and binders and all the gentle machinery of family memory. If Daniel had spent years helping decide what story my house told, he could hear the correction there. After Evan left, I carried everything into the den. The lamp by the reading chair cast a low yellow pool across the side table and the rug. I did not switch on the overhead. June hated overhead lighting for difficult conversations. "It makes people feel interrogated," she used to say, and then laugh because she knew very well some people deserved interrogation and did not care for it in either lighting arrangement. I set the photographs in a careful stack on the low table, then the altered calendar pages, the formula card, the nursery slip, the pediatric billing confirmation Evan had typed and signed as a summary of what had been verbally confirmed, and finally the book at the top. I took one of the hidden photographs, the one outside the fence, and propped it against the lamp base where Daniel would have to see it as soon as he sat down. Then I walked through the house, locking nothing and checking everything. The old habit, but changed. Not the anxious checks of a widower before bed. The deliberate movement of a man taking possession. Kitchen, hallway, back door, dining room, front porch, upstairs landing. Anna's room with the desk drawer still out on the floor beside the bed, and the faint baby powder scent hanging in the air like a question the room had stopped trying to hide. I closed that door softly and came back down. It occurred to me somewhere on the stairs that for 3 years after June's death, I had been trying to preserve the house she loved. That night, for the first time, I understood preserving and reclaiming were not the same thing. I called Daniel the next morning. "Could you come by this evening?" I asked. "There are a few things about Anna I think we need to settle." He was quiet for half a second too long. Then, "Of course. Just me." "No. Caleb, too." This time the pause was longer. "All right," he said. "What time, 7? "I don't know if 7, Daniel." I had never spoken to him that way before. Not once in all the years I had known him. The silence on the line told me he had felt it. Then he said in that smooth, careful voice that had become impossible for me to hear without anger, "I'll see what I can do." I hung up without saying goodbye. I phoned Ruth Ann after that. She answered on the first ring as if she had been living with a sound in her hand. "I need you at my house tonight," I said. A breath. "Do I have to?" "Yes." Another breath, shuddering this time. "All right." Caleb was harder to find because men like Caleb are always harder to find when truth starts looking official. Evan handled that part. By mid-afternoon he had reached him, told him only that enough had surfaced to make denial dangerous, and that if he wished to tell any useful truth before Daniel spoke for him, the time was now. Caleb's answer, according to Evan, had been a long silence followed by, "I'll come." I spent the hours before 7 cleaning things that did not need cleaning. The kitchen counters already shone. I wiped them again. The den shelves were already dusted. I dusted the lower ledge anyway. I straightened the hallway runner, though it had not moved. Set 4 chairs in the den and a 5th slightly apart for myself. Set water glasses on coasters. Removed a stack of old church newsletters from the side table because I did not want anything in that room that had not earned its place in the evening. At 5, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tied my tie twice before it sat right. Blue with a faint gray stripe. June bought it for me years ago because she said a man should own at least one tie that looked like self-respect rather than obligation. I thought of that while tightening the knot and almost laughed from the bitterness of it. June had been many things. Entirely wrong about self-respect was not one of them. The house felt different as dusk came down. Not hostile, too intentional for that. It felt like a room before a surgery cleared and waiting. The den lamp glowed warm through the doorway. The living room beyond sat in early evening shadow, the old rug dark under the coffee table, the sofa where June used to nap with one arm over her face in summer still and untouched. The whole first floor seemed to know something irreversible was about to happen inside it. At 6:30, Marian Bell called to tell me she would remain by her phone and, if necessary, could email a brief statement clarifying the practical implications of repeated temporary guardianship arrangements and billing responsibility. Sometimes old cowards need an older woman's phrasing put in front of them, she said. "Use me if you need me." I may. "You do," she said, and hung up. That steadied me more than prayer would have. Daniel arrived at 6:58. He came in through the front door, carrying his concern before him like polished silver. Dark jacket, open collar, no tie. He looked around the front hall, once taking in the quiet, and something in him sharpened. He knew at once this was not a conversation he could shepherd into safer channels. "Tom," he said, "everything all right now?" I led him into the den. He stopped just inside the doorway when he saw the chairs and the documents on the table. His gaze went first to the photograph propped by the lamp, then to the book, then to me. "Who else is coming?" "You'll see." The old instinct in me to explain, to soften, to make another man comfortable in my house rose and died before it reached my mouth. That was new. I felt the absence of it like strength. Daniel sat slowly, not in the chair I might once have offered him, but in the one facing the low table directly. He set both hands on his knees, composed, almost mild. Only the small tick at the jaw told on him. "What is this?" he asked. "This," I said, "is the first evening in 8 years nobody gets to tell me I'm too lonely or too fragile to understand my own daughter." His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time since I had known him, the concern on his face did not deepen. It thinned. Caleb arrived 4 minutes late, smelling faintly of cigarettes he had tried to cover with gum. He had thickened around the middle since I last saw him up close. Hair receding, face of a man who still wanted sympathy for damage he had helped create. He entered the den already half defeated. Saw Daniel, saw the table, saw me, and knew at once that whatever he had spent years calling a difficult period was over. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. "Sit down, Caleb." He obeyed. Ruth Ann came last, clutching her purse against her stomach as if she expected physical weather inside the room. Evan arrived with her and shut the front door behind them. He took the 5th chair only after a glance from me. The room settled into shape. 5 people, 1 lamp, 1 low table, 1 old children's book with my wife's handwriting inside. Daniel looked around at the gathered faces and seemed to understand that tone would not save him here unless facts stayed blurred, so he moved first to blur them. I think he said carefully before this gets more inflamed than it already is. We all need to remember Anna was a vulnerable person in a very unstable period. None of us should rewrite that out of guilt. There it was, the old machinery starting up before the engine had even warmed. "No one is rewriting Anna," I said. "That has been your work." He opened his mouth. I raised one hand, and to my own surprise he stopped. "Tonight is not for your framing," I said. "Tonight is for your answers." I picked up the formula card first and laid it in front of him. Then the nursery slip, then the altered calendars, then the billing summary, then the photograph from the church hallway. Last I lifted the fence photograph and placed it on top of the others. No one spoke. Caleb stared at the photograph as if it were a snake on the table. Ruth Ann began twisting her wedding band again so hard I thought the skin might break. Daniel looked at the stack and then at me. He did not reach for the papers. "Where did you get these in my house?" That answer struck harder than any accusation could have because it named the real crime. Not merely the missing years, the use of my own home as a place to store, trim, and manage what I was allowed to know. Daniel drew one slow breath. "Tom, I can explain all of this." "Good. Not like this. This is exactly how." He looked to Evan as if hoping youth and law might restore procedure. Evan only said, "Answer him." Daniel's eyes narrowed a fraction. Not anger. Calculation. "All right," he said. "Anna had periods where she was trying to stabilize. We all know that. During one of those periods, there was a child involved. Temporary care arrangements were made because Anna was not consistently able to provide a safe home. June knew some of it. I knew some of it. Caleb flinched before his name had fully arrived, was trying to keep the situation from becoming more chaotic. There was no conspiracy here. There was triage. Triage. I almost admired him for the elegance of it. Take a family betrayal and dress it in the language of emergency medicine. Very Daniel. Why wasn't I told, I asked. You were fragile. The word hung between us. Fragile. You were grieving Anna already in some ways long before she died. June was sick. There was too much strain on the household. Every conversation about Anna at that point turned into what? He hesitated. That was the first crack. Pain, he said. Pain for whom? No answer. I leaned forward. Because here is what I can prove. I can prove June was buying food for a child. I can prove a nursery slip with my daughter's initials ended up hidden in my kitchen. I can prove pediatric bills were tied to your address for years, and I can prove my daughter stood outside my backyard fence holding her child while I cooked for guests 20 feet away. So, let's try again. Pain for whom? Caleb made a sound, then half cough, half swallowed groan. Daniel did not look at him. Anna was not reliable enough for full integration into the family at that stage. The room went still in a different way. Not reliable enough for full integration. He said it like a policy, like a zoning issue, like my daughter had been a storm front, a dog bite, a tenant with poor references. Ruth Ann began to cry softly without covering her face. And something in me, long patient, long trained in civility, long misnamed as gentleness, hardened cleanly at last. Full integration, I said. Do you hear yourself? Daniel lifted his chin slightly. It is ugly, but so were those years. No, I said. The ugly part is that you found vocabulary for starving a woman's place in her own family, and then called it wisdom. He started to answer, but Caleb spoke first. I told you we should have Daniel cut across him with his first sharpness of the evening. You told me nothing useful, Caleb. That did it. Because the sentence came not with temper, but with contempt so habitual it must have lived in him for years. And suddenly the whole room could see what I had only felt before Daniel Mercer did not help people through family pain. He sorted them, assigned value, managed damage, decided who could be placed where until the scene looked right from the street. Caleb stood so abruptly his chair legs scraped hard across the wood floor. Don't do that, he said, voice shaking. Don't talk like this was all yours to decide. Daniel turned slowly toward him. Calm again already, more frightening in the return to it. Then say what was yours. Caleb looked at me, then away. I didn't know how to take care of a baby. Anna was in and out. Sometimes she was doing good, sometimes not. Daniel said his address would make insurance and doctor stuff easier. He said your wife was helping. He said Mr. Whitaker couldn't take another collapse with June sick. Did Anna want me told, I asked. Caleb rubbed one hand over his mouth. Yes. No. I mean, she did. Then she got scared. Every time she tried to come in full, something would happen. A fight, a missed appointment, a bad week. Daniel would say, let's get another clean month first. June would say, let's not do this in a way that makes Tom lose faith all over again. Anna started thinking maybe if she waited till things looked better, it'd be easier. My chest felt hollow. That was the plan, Caleb said. Always later. When she had a better place, better record, better month, better whatever. And later, just kept moving. I looked at Daniel. He did not deny it. Instead, he said, the child needed stability. That child, I said, every word clear now, needed family. She had family. Outside my fence, for the first time all evening, color rose in his face. Not much. Enough. You're romanticizing proximity, he said. A grandparent's love does not automatically make a safe structure. There it was, the mask gone, not dropped in a shout, removed in plain hands. He believed this. He believed my daughter's instability had made her contingent, and my grief had made me administratively unfit, and therefore he had been entitled to curate who got admitted back into the story and when. Not because he wanted money, Not because he wanted drama, because he believed himself the reasonable center around which more damaged people ought to rotate. I reached for the book. Everybody's eyes followed it. I opened to the flyleaf and turned it so the room could see June's inscription. Then I laid the photograph with "Not Yet Tom" written on the back beside it. "My wife," I said, and had to pause because the word "still did that to me" was wrong in ways that cost us. She was frightened. She kept smoothing the water after it had already gone bad. She thought if she could preserve one more week of calm, one more month of possibility, then Anna could come through the front door whole enough for nobody to panic. I touched the photograph with one finger. That was her sin. Not malice, not contempt. Fear dressed as timing. I looked at Daniel. "Yours was different." He said nothing. "Yours was power." Something passed across his face, then offense certainly, but beneath it something uglier and more revealing. Relief. Relief that the room had finally said aloud what he had spent years hiding inside: kindness. "You want to make me a villain," he said quietly. "Fine, I can live with that. But somebody had to keep the child fed. Somebody had to answer the school forms. The doctor forms the endless instability. Somebody had to decide what counted as help and what counted as theater. You were not in shape to do it. June was dying. Anna was a moving target. Caleb was useless. So yes, I made decisions. Every eye in the room stayed on him. He went on, calmer than ever. And I would make them again before handing a child over to sentiment. The sentence landed like a verdict. That was when Ruth Ann, still crying, said into her hands. She kissed the child's hair in the hallway like she thought it might be the last time. Daniel shut his eyes for one brief second. Not remorse, irritation at disorder. Ruth Ann lifted her face, blotched and shaking. "You told me Mr. Whitaker was too tender to survive the whole truth. That was what you said. Too tender, as if love was a weakness on paperwork." Daniel turned toward her. "Ruth Ann, no." Her voice broke but held. "No. I have carried your language in my mouth for years, and I'm done with it." Something like admiration moved through me then, even in all that wreckage. I looked at Caleb. "Where is she now?" He swallowed. "Lila's with Marissa, the woman from the park." He nodded. "Who is she?" "My cousin. On my mother's side. She's been helping with after school and weekends since—" He stopped. "Since what?" "Since Anna died." The room tightened. Did Anna know Lila would end up there? I don't know what she knew by the end. Cowardly answer. Perhaps true. Those are often hardest to bear. Evan spoke then for the first time in several minutes. "Caleb, I need you to be very clear. Was there ever a formal termination of Anna's parental rights? Number, any order barring Tom from contact? Number, any adoption? Number. Just guardianship stuff, temporary, renewed." Marion's word came back through me then, one of the cruelest words in family paperwork. Temporary. I stood. No one else did. I had not planned what I would say after that point. Or perhaps I had been planning it for 8 years, without language. The den seemed to gather around me. The bookshelves, the lamp, June's chair across from mine, the old wood floor under my shoes. The room where I had once believed memory could be curated gently enough to remain kind. "I want you all to hear this clearly," I said. My voice did not rise. That helped. Quiet makes people lean toward what they least want to hear. My daughter was not weather. She was not a contamination risk. She was not an unstable substance to be stored outside the house until the adults agreed the room could survive her. She was a woman in trouble who kept trying to come back to the people who were supposed to tell the truth about her. And every time she came close, I looked at Daniel, turned her into a timing problem. He opened his mouth. I held up a hand. He stopped. "No. You will hear me now." I could feel the years behind the sentence. "You did not protect this family from my daughter. You protected yourselves from her need. You protected the table from discomfort, the church from mess, the house from noise, my wife from choosing, me from my own duty, and then you called that protection." The last word hung hard in the room. Daniel's face had gone very still. Not ashamed, exposed. "You are not mistaken about one thing," I said. "I did fail her. I got tired. I said things I should never have said. I let calm look like wisdom because I did not know how to survive the opposite. But that failure was mine to answer for, not yours to use." Caleb had lowered his head into one hand. Ruth Ann was openly weeping now. Evan sat absolutely motionless, which was how he looked when he was memorizing something important. Daniel said, "What do you want, Tom?" "Not an apology, not forgiveness. Terms, I want the full guardianship history. Every renewal, every address, every doctor form tied to your name. I want Caleb's written statement. I want Marissa contacted through counsel, not church whispers. I want Lila's care stabilized lawfully, without one more day of managed confusion, and I want the record corrected anywhere this family's version of Anna has been allowed to stand as if it were complete. That's not all yours to command." "No," I said, "but it is all yours to stop obstructing." Evan rose then and set a folder on the table. "I already drafted the first requests," he said, "and if anyone in this room decides tonight is a good night to start losing documents, I will treat that as what it is." Caleb stared at him. Daniel looked once at the folder and seemed to understand at last that the evening had moved beyond moral choreography. Still, he tried one more angle. "Tom," he said softer now, almost weary, "if you drag all of this into the light exactly as it happened, you will damage June's memory too." It was the cleverest thing he had said all night, because for a second it touched the most vulnerable part of me. My wife. Her blue mug, her lists, her tired body, her frightened tenderness. The woman who had loved our daughter badly at the end perhaps, but loved her all the same. I picked up the photograph again and looked at June's handwriting on the back. Then I set it down. "No," I said. "A lie damages the dead. Truth is, the only thing that leaves them with any dignity at all." That finished him. Not because he cared for dignity in the same way I did, but because he understood the room now belonged to a different moral logic than the one he had been running for years. His authority in that house was gone. His voice still existed. His influence would still make trouble outside those walls. But the old arrangement, Daniel as interpreter of what everyone could bear, had died in my den while the lamp burned beside a children's book. The rest of the night was paperwork, statements, and the first rough scaffolding of justice. Caleb signed a preliminary declaration before leaving, hand shaking so badly Evan had to steady the notepad with one palm. He admitted Daniel's address had been used on pediatric billing and school forms because it made things look settled. Admitted that Anna repeatedly asked when her father would be told. Admitted that each answer had been some version of later. Marissa's name and number went into Evan's folder. Ruth Ann signed her own statement, including the cookout at my fence and the church hallway scene. Daniel refused to sign anything that night, but his refusal did not carry the old power it once might have. Refusal was only refusal now, not curation. When they finally left, it was after 10. The front door shut behind Daniel with the same ordinary click it had always made. Yet the house sounded different afterward, as if some long-held breath had gone out of it. Evan stayed behind to help me stack the papers, then stood in the front hall with his coat on and one hand on the knob. "You did exactly what had to be done," he said. "I did it 8 years late." "Yes," he said. "And tonight you still did it." He left me with that. I turned out lights in every room but the den and the living room. Then I sat in the reading chair with the book in my lap and the photograph beside me. The house was no longer deceptive in the same way. That does not mean it felt healed. It felt stripped. The kind of rawness that comes after wallpaper is torn down and you can finally see the damp creeping through the plaster that the paper had prettied up. I slept in the chair until dawn. The next days moved with the strange doubleness that follows family catastrophe once it enters the daylight. There were calls, emails, 2 meetings with Evan, 1 formal consultation with Marion Bell, who turned out to be even more useful in person when angry. Marissa, the woman from the park, agreed through counsel to bring Lila for a supervised visit once the immediate legal confusion was addressed and once Caleb signed a fuller acknowledgement. She had been frightened, Evan said, not of me exactly, but of being left holding the child in the collapse of other adults' mess. I could not blame her for that. Daniel hired his own lawyer within 48 hours. Of course he did. Men who build life around controlling other people's volatility do not surrender because their moral authority cracks in one room. They retreat into systems. But now the systems had to answer back. Guardianship records were requested, billing records preserved. Caleb, under the threat of having to speak more publicly later, began speaking usefully now. He named dates, facilities. One apartment Anna stayed in for 4 months while trying to get things stable enough to introduce Lila properly. One time she came to my street and sat in a parked car with the child for 10 full minutes before losing courage because Daniel had told her I was already having a bad week with June's treatment. I did not know whether to believe every contour of Caleb's remorse. I did not need to. The shape was already clear. The church reacted the way churches often do when one of their quieter sins becomes impossible to hold in euphemism. Some people were appalled at Daniel. Some were appalled at conflict. Some chose phrases like complex situation because they could not bear to say we helped leave a woman outside her father's gate. But the axis had shifted. Ruth Ann did not let them re-soften it. Marion, though not a church member, seemed to take private pleasure in making sure old ladies with influence understood the practical obscenity of repeated temporary arrangements hidden behind family language. Evan moved the legal pieces forward with the unemotional clarity of a man who understood that morality without paperwork is often just grief talking to itself. And through all of it, the house changed in increments. I took the hidden photographs from the yellow dish towel and put them where they belonged, not framed yet, not displayed like trophies, but present. On the dining room table first, then in the den. Then one by one into new archival sleeves in a fresh album I bought myself instead of using June's curated books. That mattered. I was not repairing the old curation. I was building a truer record. I removed the altered calendar pages from the drawer and stored them in a labeled folder with the legal materials. I cleaned out the linen closet and set the rabbit nightlight on the kitchen counter for a full day before deciding to keep it rather than throw it away. Not because I loved it, because the house had hidden enough already. The most difficult room remained the kitchen. I could stand in the den now and feel something like reclaimed sorrow. In the kitchen, the air still held too many postponed conversations, too many cups of coffee, at which Daniel had likely sat while June worried, and Anna hovered in conditional access outside the door. Yet even there, change came. I took down June's blue mug and put it back on the front hook where it belonged. Not as an absolution, as a refusal to let her be remembered either as saint or accomplice alone. That was the strange grace of the weeks that followed. June's memory did not get cleaner. It got truer. I could love her and still feel wounded by her. I could see that she had preserved false peace and also know she had done it out of fear, not contempt. She had bought formula, hidden photos, written. Not yet, because she could not yet bear the explosion truth would bring into a house already under strain. That was not enough courage. But it was not the same thing as Daniel's cold administration of who counted as stable enough to belong. By the time Lila's first honest visit was arranged, spring had advanced enough for the dogwood to open. The blossoms looked almost indecently hopeful against all that had come before. I stood at the sink that afternoon and watched white petals shift in the yard, while my heart behaved with a young man's stupidity in my chest. Not joy. Not exactly. Something more fragile and harder to carry. Anticipation with grief threaded all through it. I had bought graham crackers, applesauce, bananas. The first 2 items on June's old list sat on the counter in plain view. I had not bought formula. Lila did not need it now. Yet setting the other things there felt like completing some domestic sentence my wife had begun and never gotten to finish. Marissa brought her at 3. She was smaller in my front hall than she had seemed at the park, and larger too, which is another way of saying real. Yellow raincoat again, because perhaps that was simply her favorite brown hair clipped back, one picture book hugged to her chest. She looked around the hall with the solemn attention of a child entering a place adults have loaded with meaning. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. I did not call myself Grandpa. I would not take with my mouth what had been denied with everyone else's. Marissa remained only long enough to settle her speak with Evan by the porch and confirm the next steps. She looked tired, decent, and ashamed of more than was likely hers to carry. Before leaving, she crouched to Lila's level and said, "I'll be right back later." "Okay." "Mr. Whitaker's house is safe." Safe. The word touched me unexpectedly. Not because I felt proud, because I understood the house had to become that. In fact, not only in sentiment. After Marissa left, Lila stood in the living room, turning slowly, looking at the lamp, the sofa, the photographs I had placed on the mantel. Her eyes stopped on one of Anna at 16 in a choir robe. "That's my mama," she said. My throat closed. "Yes," I said, "that's your mama." She considered the picture, then me. "She looks bigger there." She was. That seemed to satisfy her. Children do not enter grief the way adults do. They touch it, withdraw, ask for crackers, return to it by strange side doors. I gave her applesauce in the blue bowl June once used for Anna when she had the flu. Lila sat at the kitchen table swinging one foot and ate with grave concentration. After 3 bites, she looked around and said, "This house smells like book pages." I nearly laughed and cried at once. "That's because it has a lot of them." I know. The answer was simple, but it carried the whole changed weight of the house. I know. Not from whispers now, not from hidden thresholds. From being inside it, honestly. When she finished eating, I asked if she wanted to see the den. She nodded. We went in together. Late afternoon light angled through the shears just as it had on the Sunday morning when the lamp first looked wrong. The reading chairs faced each other. The shelves stood clean and full. The old rabbit book lay on the side table where it belonged. Lila saw it at once. Her face did not light theatrically. That would have been less moving. Instead, she grew very still the way children do when something beloved and real appears before them after being spoken of elsewhere. "That one," she said softly. I took it up and held it a moment before handing it to her. The book looked even smaller in her hands than I expected. She ran one finger over the taped spine, then opened to the front cover with the instinctive care of a child who has already been taught that some objects carry more than paper. She looked at June's handwriting without speaking. I sat down in the reading chair because my knees would not have obeyed me standing. "Your Grandma June wrote that," I said. Lila nodded as if this were not news but confirmation. "She read this to Mama." "Yes, and to me." There was no accusation in the statement, no triumph, only fact. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said, "to you too." She climbed onto the rug instead of the chair, folding one leg under herself in a way so like June that it startled me. Children inherit nothing cleanly. Gesture travels through families as strangely as grief. She laid the book open in her lap and turned to the page with the ribbon. "I like this part," she said. "The skin horse." She looked up, surprised. "You know it?" I nearly said I used to. Instead, I said I know it. So I read. Aloud this time. My voice was rough on the first pages and steadier after that. Lila listened with the full-body seriousness of children who have learned stories not as entertainment but as shelter. Outside, the dogwood moved in the breeze. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator motor clicked on. The house sounded inhabited in a new way, not crowded, not cured, simply truthful. When I came to the flyleaf again at the end, I stopped. June's inscription stared up in faded blue. "For Anna." So she'll know that love is what makes a thing real. Love, Mama. For a moment I could not continue because the room contained too much at once. Anna, small enough for the ribbon, Anna grown and shaking outside my fence. June at the counter with her lists and postponements. Daniel's calm contempt. Lila on my rug with the book in her lap, where it should have been all along. The dead, the living, the years nobody could return. My eyes blurred. Lila looked up at me, then down at the page. Very gently, as if touching something sleeping, she placed her small hand over June's handwriting. "Grandma June," she said. "Not as clue now, not as key, as family." The house held that. I sat there in the warm lamplight with the old rabbit book open between us and understood something I had been too frightened to believe even after all the evidence, all the papers, all the statements and legal motions and corrected records. Truth had not brought my daughter back. It had not made me innocent. It had not made June simple or the lost years less lost. But it had changed the house from a place organized around omission into a place where her real story could finally be spoken without someone hushing the room. Lila left at dusk with Marissa promising in the solemn way children do that she would be back for the rabbit part where becoming hurts. After the door closed behind them, I stood for a long while in the front hall, listening to the quiet settle. Not empty quiet. Resting quiet. A different thing. Then I went back to the den. The lamp was still on. The book lay open where Lila had left it on the rug before I moved it to the side table. June's chair faced mine across the small territory of light. I sat down and let the room be what it was. Now not absolved, not innocent, but reclaimed. On the mantel among the photographs I had restored, Anna stood in 3 ages, now small, laughing, grown tired, holding her child. None of the pictures had been chosen for prettiness. That mattered. She was no longer curated into a version the house could bear. She was simply there. Outside evening pressed blue against the windows. Inside the den smelled faintly of old paper lemon polish and the applesauce Lila had spilled on her cuff and wiped with perfect seriousness on the dish towel when she thought I had not noticed. I would not wash that towel till morning. I reached for the book one last time before bed and closed it carefully around the ribbon. The cover, rabbit, with its one rubbed-away eye, looked less forlorn than it had before. Or perhaps I did. I switched off the lamp and stood in the dark a moment, hand resting on the chair back where June's palm had worn the wood smooth over, years of reading aloud to people she loved imperfectly and very much. Then I went upstairs through a house that no longer felt like an edited account of my life. Only my life. And for the first time in many years, that was enough to let me sleep.